In that case, let's give the floor to Maria del Carmen Martinez. She's from the University of Fernando Pessoa of Portugal, and she's going to talk to us on digital children's literature, new narratives for inclusion of children with that are hard of hearing or deaf.
Gracias.
Well, thank you very much. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. In this presentation, I'm going to talk about the importance of a valuable tool for including children that have a certain degree of deafness. Digital narrative, which we can use through computers or through other digital devices that we have today. The first one is narrative. Narrative is basically, in this particular case, is a text that we can develop in a media, a written or spoken media. Each one of these uses some sort of representation and has evolved in different ways. The first thing we need to address is the importance of narrative within the education of children. Narrative has evolved from an oral tradition to the printed book, to radio, movies, television, videos, and now we have digital narrative. All of these aspects and stages has implemented in its evolution, has been a combination of the previous ones in order to develop that narrative. Now we have digital technologies accessible to all, for children of all ages. The problem we face is that because narratives enables children to develop their own identity, but also to learn how to relate to the world, the difficulties to be able to read lowers the self-esteem of a person. Now, a disability to read means that the person with this limitation doesn't really develop skills, writing skills. Now, this problem, in the case that we're interested in, which is deafness or hard of hearing, we know there's certain degrees. There are different degrees of deafness, from total deaf to different degrees of hardness of hearing. Mild or moderate hypoacusia doesn't mean that one cannot communicate, but it does require the use of certain devices to help them develop those communication skills in children and in people that have this degree of disability. Some things to bear in mind, some realities. First of all, the presence of language to the little children that are deaf introduces many difficulties, semantics and so on, and many barriers. So children have to start using language at a very early stage and need to use it as soon as possible to help them develop the skills. The sooner a child with disability accesses the use of language, it would be better for them to help them to develop reading and writing skills. Among other things, this has shown helped us to prove that children that are grown with parents that are deaf or that use a sign language, they develop a lot faster the bilingual skills to communicate by means of sign language and also by written language, whatever language it may be, English, French, whatever. It's also been shown that deaf children cannot, as used to be felt, it was felt that they have a lower degree of intellectual capabilities, but are limited for communication. And this can lead to limitations also, and to develop intellectual abilities. We can reach the conclusion that the sooner the children develop communication skills, the better and faster for them to understand, better the comprehension skills and also their intellectual development. I have some statistics that show this. For example, Marchesi and Asensio shown through the testing that children with deaf children, as I said, that communicate using sign language, get higher scores, higher intellectual scores than deaf children that with parents that don't dominate or don't use sign language. Vygotsky already showed that lack of social interaction meant a poor cognitive development. So a child with a limitation will develop little social interrelationships, will clearly also have a lot of limitations in their intellectual lives. In other words, an impoverished intellectual life. Doesn't mean that they will intellectually be limited. It's just that it's the education and rearing that will prevent them from having that sort of development. We also have statistics, for example, in this. For children, deaf children, normally are born in families, in hearing families. Less than 10% of deaf children have deaf parents, or parents that can dominate sign language. So more than 90% of the deaf children have this disability that impacts their intellectual development. Some scientists established already that the difference between deaf children and normal children is, children that can hear, of course, have difficulties in writing and so on, and also lack of experience of the teachers, instructors, or people that are preparing them for these, educating them. Also, the lack of children to do these exams. As we said, in nonverbal education is the same. Nonverbal skills are the same for children with hearing and non-hearing problems. But there are certain differences. For example, obviously, it is believed that deaf children have more neurological problems and also more difficulties to understand instructions. Third, in general, deaf children have a lower social status than children that can hear properly, and also are less motivated to carry out tasks because, as we said already, a hearing disability becomes a social isolation, a factor for social isolation. However, we've found that intelligent tests for children with hearing problems and children that are not means that there's big differences between deaf children and their academic performance, specifically reading and maths. And reading skills were particularly severe. These differences was less so in the case of children that had parents that knew sign language, or deaf with sign language, or knew sign language.